I'm gonna have to move, aren't I, to keep him in the shot. There's confusion online. It's true. Controversy is brewing behind the term neurodiversity. What even is it? To whom does it apply? Has the word lost all meaning? Did neurodivergent ever mean anything? Aren't we all neurodivergent? Those are but some of the questions I'll be answering in this video. But if you can't hang around, a word, everyone, no, yes, no. Thank you, goodbye, please like and subscribe. For everyone else, I'll be diving into the terms neurodiversity, neurodivergent, neurotypical, and the neurodiversity movement, and addressing some of these concerns that I've seen online lately. Neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is a term which simply describes the fact that all brains are diverse. And people wonder why sometimes I don't have boba in every single scene of my videos. The thing they say about working with animals, fully true. Neurodiversity is a term which simply describes the fact that all brains are different. That might seem like stating the obvious, but for much of history, especially where I'm from, human neurology was thought of in rather essentialist terms, meaning that there is one correct way for brains to work and anything which deviates from that is abnormal. But as we learn more about brains and evolution, we can attest that that simply is not the case. Whether through genetics, environment, or injury, or just basic existence as individuals on this planet who experience things, we know that brains are always adapting. We know that they can function in multitudes of ways and that many factors exist that can impact how a brain might function. It really seems like the more we learn about brains, the more nuanced things become. Who would have thought that complex systems are complex? The old models of how brains evolved are now being torn down. And those things that we used to say about like, oh, this part of the brain is for this thing and that part of the brain is for that thing, that seems to be less like a rule or something that is always true, and more like this is true for the vast majority of brains. But we see in people who have rare conditions or who have had brain injuries that the brain is much more flexible and adaptable than previously thought. You know this, we live in the age of the brain hack, for crying out loud. And we all know the term neuroplasticity, even if we might sometimes be a little bit liberal in its application. So neurodiversity is a term which describes all human neurology. It's a broad term in the sense that all people are covered by it, but it's not vague. It's shorthand for a fact that variety is the norm. If all brains worked in the same way, we would not exist as we do. A variety of types of people is how we have come so far as a species. To say that brains are naturally diverse is a statement of fact. There is nothing that we could do to make them not so. They are shaped from the very beginning and they continue to be shaped until the very end. So neurodiversity is just a word which describes a fact about brains, that they are diverse. It has always been the norm and will always be. Not vague. Neurodivergency and neurotypicality, on the other hand, are incredibly vague terms. But right, and pay close attention here, right? Because if you heard the word vague and thought to yourself meaningless, then I'm sorry to inform you, but you are quite a silly sausage. Just the silliest little sausage. Tall is a vague term. Its meaning depends on an awful lot. Is it a person? A building? A spice rack? From whose perspective is it tall? A child? An adult? Another building? The fly on the counter? Is it tall in comparison to something else? Somebody who is considered to be tall in Papua New Guinea might be an average height in the Netherlands. Like, a tall jockey and a tall basketball player are going to be pretty different heights, aren't they? But we'd never say that tall has no meaning. A huge number of our everyday, very meaningful words are vague terms. Many adjectives. A cloud is a vague object. Where does a cloud begin and end? It's a collection of droplets of water vapour floating around amongst the atmosphere. Do we count the end of the cloud as the very last droplet of water vapour in proximity to said cloud? Or is it when we start being able to see through it? But then we wouldn't consider a translucent cloud not a cloud, would we? There is no real objective answer to that. Do clouds have no meaning? If somebody can be disabled in one situation and not in another, are they really disabled? So in my mind, I'm not seeing two distinctly, strictly defined and separate groups who are the neurotypicals and the neurodivergents.
Neurodivergent and neurotypical.
So you will have heard me use the terms neurodivergent and neurotypical in generalised ways before, but I do try to be very intentional with my use of these words. So, for example, I might say, neurodivergent people have historically been oppressed, or neurodivergent people might struggle to maintain a career. Or, for example, neurotypical people might struggle to understand our experiences, or society was designed with neurotypical people in mind. I use the term neurodivergent to mean
those whose neurology differs in some way that presents problems and barriers in day-to-day life.
aka a brain-based disability. Pretty broad. It includes those with learning disabilities, mental health and mood conditions, brain injuries or diseases, trauma disorders, and of course your OCDs, your ADHDs and your autisms, and lots of other things. Things which are treatable, things which aren't, things which are disabling through the social model and the medical model. Like, there's no need for a full list. I think you get the gist. What I try to never do is use neurodivergent as shorthand for ADHD and or autism. This is a very valid complaint that I see time and time again from people who are neurodivergent in other ways. Like, I got bored trying to list all the ways that somebody could be neurodivergent, so it should be pretty clear that narrowing it down to those two neurotypes can be extremely alienating to most neurodivergent people. Neurodivergent should never really be used as a synonym for a specific neurotype, at least not in an advocacy setting. I can completely understand why individuals in their day-to-day life might want to say, I'm neurodivergent, instead of listing off to strangers in exactly what ways they are. That stuff's personal. Most of the time it's none of your business. But if you're trying to do education, outreach, or advocacy, you should really only use neurodivergent when you mean to be general. If you mean autistic, just say autistic. Neurodivergency is a kind of disability. The things which fall under the umbrella of neurodivergent, not diversity, divergence, they're disabilities. And the neurodiversity movement is a disabled rights movement. The neurodiversity movement. The neurodiversity movement was born out of disability rights movements in the 80s and early 90s. I might do a full video on the neurodiversity movement, on the history of it, one day. If there's interest, let me know in the comments. But it has grown into a loosely interconnected social movement which aims to increase understanding and acceptance of the fact of neurodiversity, and to encourage and enforce supports and rights for neurodivergent people. Basically all the stuff that you would expect from a disability rights movement. Neurodiversity advocates, while being a mixed bag of individuals, academics, artists, and activists, generally all hold that neurodivergent people face obstacles, loss of rights and freedoms, abuse, and oppression due to their neurology. So it's a little bit funny to me when critics complain that the neurodiversity movement is romanticizing debilitating conditions, when every neurodiversity advocate I know is practically screaming into a pillow at this point due to the urgent and life-saving needs of neurodivergent people going ignored by most of society. But there's going to be a lot more on that in that response video I'm doing. So, to recap, neurodivergent means somebody with a brain-based disability. Neurodiversity describes the natural variety of all human neurology. And the neurodiversity movement is a civil rights movement that supports neurodivergent people and who advocates for the concept of neurodiversity to be mainstreamed. And finally, neurotypical. Neurotypical is also a vague term. It can't really mean
those who have never, ever experienced any debilitating impacts due to the way their brain works. Ever.
It's probably everyone has moments in their lives where their brains aren't braining the way they would like them to. Did you temporarily forget your PIN a few times? Or do you consistently forget things that are very important for you to remember, causing you and others lots of inconvenience and problems and potentially even insecurity or harm? Within populations, we group people together based on them having enough shared characteristics in common. So of course these groups are not entirely homogeneous, but their grouping together is still meaningful. And also, for example, if we say something like, in a white supremacist system, all white people have privilege, that doesn't then follow that no white person ever experienced hardship. Neurotypical people might well have bad days, forgetful moments, times when they just can't socialize, dips in their executive functioning, but disability becomes disability when it's disabling. So if you don't experience sustained hardship in connection with your neurology, you're neurotypical. Will there be borderline cases? Yes, of course. That's always the case with vague concepts. There will be people who have traits of some neurodivergency, but just who aren't affected by it so much. And does everyone who considers themselves to be neurodivergent also need to consider themselves to be disabled? I mean, no. You could consider yourself to be whatever you like. But when I say neurodivergent, I'm talking about disability. And again, in educational settings, I think that's the most useful use of the word. And like with many forms of disability, one can be more or less disabled or neurodivergent in certain settings than in others, or under certain stresses, or at certain times of the day or month. It's a comparative and vague term which depends on a great deal. Just like tall. Someone might be tall in some situations and not in others, while somebody who is 8'5" will probably always be tall. To call something vague does not render it meaningless. Disability impacts people in all kinds of ways. This is partly why we don't use functioning labels for autistic people anymore. On one hand, it labelled whole groups of people non-functioning, people who, with the right care and supports in place, might be able to do a lot more than was first judged of them. And on the other, it labelled a whole group of disabled people high-functioning, meaning that when they did ask for supports and care, it was deemed unnecessary. What I want as a neurodiversity advocate is for people who need support and care to get it, and to be believed when they say they need it. And for society to stop putting disabled people into two boxes. Two boxes. I want society to stop putting disabled people into two boxes. The really disabled, who have no voice and who can't be expected to ever experience fulfillment, so why even try? And the not really disabled. The people who fake things, make stuff up for attention or something. People who really need to just try harder, stop complaining and taking up so much space. Again, there's going to be so much more of this in my response video. You would be surprised how prevalent that attitude is. I've simplified it down there. It sounds extreme, but it is very common. So I hope today we've learned that neurodiversity is a very simple term with a very clearly defined meaning. All brains are diverse. Human neurology is diverse. That neurodivergent describes a person who is disabled in some kind of brain-based way, not just autism and ADHD. That neurotypical is somebody who is not disabled in this kind of way. Like, of course, you can have neurotypical disabled people. And that the neurodiversity movement is a civil rights movement. And that vague does not equal meaningless. These vague terms are actually incredibly useful because brain-based disability is often invisible and people can have multiple neurodivergencies. People often do have multiple neurodivergencies, which is why you get so many TikTokers just saying I'm neurodivergent. Because they are. So instead of having to say,
Society should be more accommodating of people with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, OCD, brain injuries, mental health conditions, trauma disorders, brain disease,
and so on, we can just say neurodivergent people. Just as wheelchair user encompasses people who'll never walk again, people who never could walk, people who just sometimes need to use a chair, people who are temporarily injured. Talking about wheelchair users still has meaning as those people all have that thing in common, and things which help people who are completely paralysed will also help people who are temporarily using a chair or even who just have trouble walking. And we wouldn't go red in the face and start complaining that someone who has trouble walking uses a wheelchair ramp because they're not completely paralysed, would we? But that's the kind of thing that is happening in neurodiversity spaces right now. And it's a huge shame. And again, I'm stepping on content from the response video. I can't help myself. Subscribe and hit the bell if you're looking forward to this one as much as I apparently am. I hope you're looking forward to those other projects. This is a bit of a shorter one for me, but it is something that I thought needed to be clarified. As I said, there's confusion online. I'm not going to name any names, but there are some creators out there, and I am using the term creator pretty loosely here, but who enjoy going around calling neurodiversity advocates names because they used terms like neurodivergent. And I figured that if you're doing that, then you must not know what those words mean. So here, this is for you. This channel is only possible thanks to my patrons. If you enjoy my work, please consider joining them. Like, comment, and subscribe to see those other more substantial projects coming soon. Down.